Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our online briefing for the expression of interest on understanding tsunami risk to Australia from volcanic sources. My name's Nicola Moore, and I'm a Node Research Manager with Natural Hazards Research Australia. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're meeting across a range of different unceded Aboriginal lands today. And let's take this opportunity to pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that these lands and waters have always been places of teaching, research and learning. First Nations people have long cared for country as kin and continue to do so today. And we can all play a role in dismantling the ongoing processes of colonisation by supporting Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people on this journey. After all, we all share the same fundamental goal of resilient and sustainable landscapes and communities and everything in between. And we have much to learn from our First Nations people. Just a bit of explanation for this slide. The artwork depicted here features in our Reflect Reconciliation Action Plan and was commissioned from Leanne Brooke, an Aboriginal artist living and working on Murrumayung Yuin country, and we're very grateful to Leanne for creating this artwork for us because it reminds us that reconciliation needs to be embedded in the goals and purposes of the work we do at Natural Hazards Research Australia. So today's briefing will provide all of you with a detailed description of the project, and it also gives you an opportunity to pose specific questions to assist you with developing submissions for our current expression of interest on this project. Just to let you know, the answers to the questions that you ask here will also be transcribed and shared on the project page under the FAQs for this EOI. Please ask questions at any time. You can type them in via the chat, or you should be able to raise your hand. Have a look at the prompts down the bottom of the screen and they'll show you what functionality is available. Today's briefing is going to be an easy flowing, not too formal briefing, and the chat is open. Use it as much as you like, comments, questions, etc. at any time. But we should also have time at the end for Q&A for all of you as well. But the most important thing today is that you, the researchers, get to ask questions and clarify aspects for this call of expression of interest. Hopefully you'll get a good understanding of what we have in mind for this project and also on the EOI process itself, so that you're in a good position to put in a solid submission to the centre. We really appreciate the time and effort that goes into responses to calls for expressions of interest. They're a lot of work to pull together, so please use this opportunity to get what you need from us to support you in your application. And it's also an opportunity to introduce yourself via the chat to other researchers online. And if you share your field of interest, you might be able to even get together afterwards, yeah, if you want to put in a collaborative consortium submission as well. So it's an opportunity, I suppose, to introduce yourself to others that are here. So today we're going to do some introductions because we've got some wonderful guests with us today. We're going to provide you with some information about NHRA, a bit about the project, and a bit on the governance and reporting for the project once it commences, but also we'll touch on the requirements within the EOI process and have question time at the end. So let's kick off and start with introductions. Well, I've already introduced myself, so you know who I am. I'm the Node Research Manager for Queensland and Northern Territory, and I'm based up here in Brisbane. But I'd like to introduce you to Lara Wedding. Lara's our Senior Research Services Project Officer, and Lara's actually based down in Melbourne and is driving the Zoom for us today, and we'll also be doing the transcription from it for any questions that we get. But we have three experienced agency end users that have all played a key role in the development of this project. And I'll just quickly introduce you to them and then talk a bit about the centre and then hand over to these experienced agency end users to tell you more about the project. So we've got Chris Irvine, who's the Acting Assistant Director, Operations and Resources from the Tasmanian State Emergency Service. Thank you, Chris. We've got Dr. Jane Sexton, who's the Director for State Intelligence Predictions and Planning from Queensland Fire Department, and Matt Zanini, who's the Manager Hazard Research and Intelligence from the Department of Fire and Emergency Services in Western Australia. We're a not-for-profit research centre. We stand on the shoulders of the former Bushfire Cooperative Research Centre and the Bushfire and Natural Hazards Cooperative Centre, so providing essentially over 20 years of research into natural hazards in the Australian context. We commenced in 2021 with a new bespoke funding agreement from the Commonwealth Government that's been augmented with contributions from formal centre participant agencies. And that enables a flexible new research model that's totally focused on end-user driven research. We conduct 2 research investment rounds each year, and this is when centre participant agencies can submit research concepts that are aligned to key focus areas within our biennial research plan. And that's where this research project has come from. It's coming through our core research program, and this project was submitted by the Tasmanian SES on behalf of the Australian Tsunami Advisory Group. I'm going to hand over to Chris Irvine to provide you with some detail on where the need from this work was identified.
Thank you to everybody who's attending the briefing today. It's great to see a level of interest in the project. So really Australia collectively has had a long-standing collaborative approach to better understanding for warning and preparing for tsunami risk, most significantly after the Boxing Day tsunami, which saw a massive global effort in terms of, in first instance, understanding tsunami risk. And that's progressed over the subsequent years with a lot of work in understanding the national scale tsunami risk from earthquake sources. Most recently, we had the volcanic earthquake in Tonga, which highlighted there is an opportunity to increase our understanding of these volcanic sourced tsunamis in the national landscape. The key coordinative mechanism in Australia for tsunami risk management is the Australian Tsunami Advisory Group, of which I'm the current chair, and that brings together like-minded people from the Bureau of Meteorology, Geoscience Australia, the National Emergency Management Agency, and various state jurisdictions, where we come together to ensure we've got a coordinated and consistent approach to managing tsunami risk. And our reflections after the Tonga tsunami were that we did need to make an investment in understanding the risk profile of tsunamis generated by earthquakes, and that was really the genesis of this project. And I'd like to acknowledge the fantastic work that Jane and Matt have done in taking a broad an identified need and a broad concept into what I feel is a well-defined project with good scope and some really clear outcomes.
Thanks, Chris. I'll hand over to Jane then.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. And yeah, I guess really just to set the scene for this project, and it's going to be no surprise that really major trigger, of course, was the 2022 Hunga Tonga volcanic eruption that anyway happened in January or February of that year. This was a huge wake-up call for Australia in the sense, whilst we have had historical precedent for volcanic risk in Australia, our memory of it here is just we had no understanding, no appreciation that this was really a possibility. Is that conceptually we've always understood that tsunamis can be generated by a range of sources, but as Chris has pointed out, is that our whole system has been generated around earthquake-triggered tsunamis, and which is only fair and reasonable because most tsunamis are created or generated by earthquakes. So this event occurred, and it was a major sort of shake-up for the sector. And it's really incumbent on us, really, to ensure that we reflect on this event, take on board the fact that we didn't know what the risk really was, and to ask ourselves seriously whether something like this could happen again, and also whether or not something like this, but bigger and in a different location, and what that could mean for our large population that resides along the eastern seaboard. What I've done here just on this slide is snip from an ABC News article, and also just want to draw attention to some other impacts or consequences that can occur from these events. And we have slipped this into the EOI as well, is the fact that these things can or do have the potential for disruption of comms cables. And if that was to occur, that has a major disruption, to our economic sector here in Australia. So what went on during the Hunga Tonga event? Well, as I just sort of said, our systems have been built to detect an earthquake, start watching the sea levels through our monitoring system, and to issue warnings for our, affected coastlines. In this particular case, we did get some notification, really, this event had occurred, but we had no models in place to understand what that might mean for our coastline. Sure, we could start watching the sea levels that were being picked up by our various systems in the Pacific, but we were really sort of blind in a way about trying to understand what might happen on the coastline. The Bureau, of course, stepped up to the mark and really did what they could with the information they did to help, predict what we think might occur on the Australian coastline. And as a result, a marine threat warning was issued for large parts of the eastern seaboard, from Queensland all the way down to Tassie, I think. Chris, is that right? Yeah. So marine warnings, there was still a lot of uncertainty in that, because we didn't quite know the time of arrival, what time of the tidal cycle that might be at. And in parts of southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales, that could lead to a huge evacuation requirement that needed to be put in place. So there was a lot of questions being asked, and really, making sure that we had messaging and, starting to get prepared, of thinking about what would that mean to evacuate what could be a very large population. And really, we were, doing what we could with the information that we had available. But could you imagine a situation where we were positioned like we are for earthquake-triggered tsunamis, to have information to understand what the risk is, and to take informed, risk-informed decisions to keep our community safe. And Matt, would you like to talk to this if you're available? If not, I will.
Thanks, Jane, and good morning, everybody. I promise I'm here, but the most horrible of timing, my camera has dropped out and I can't seem to put it back on. So good morning, everybody from Perth. Great to have you here, and thank you, Jane and Chris. There's a precedent in WA for tsunami triggered by a volcano, most famously in the 1800s, Krakatoa. So there is history of it. There is record of such an event causing problems Western Australian coastline, and we're aware that there is a degree of risk, of course, along the Indonesian coastline, but also to our southwest in the Southern Ocean from Heard and McDonald Islands. So from a Western Australian perspective, very interested to get some granularity around the extent to which our volcanoes to our southwest do pose a tsunami threat. And we think that some granularity in this would be really beneficial to WA in its tsunami risk management, and would complement our existing work on understanding inundation threat posed from earthquake-generated tsunami. So we've got a lot of work, some regionally extensive inundation mapping and modelling along our west coast between Busselton to Kalbarri, and that work continues up the northwest coastline. But it is a bit of a black spot for us to actually understand the quantum of risk posed by non-earthquake sources. So hence including this in the EOI. Very interested to understand the threat posed by a volcano to our southwest coastline in particular.
Okay, so really just to summarise what we've really talked about here is that this question is really important to us, and each of Chris as chair of the Australian Tsunami Advisory Group, and as well as Matt and I as members of that group, we are really wanting to understand this from the whole group's perspective. It's happened before. That means it can happen again, and we need to understand what that risk is. Once we understand more about that risk, we can then start developing plans, advancing our warning systems, and to raise awareness. And really what we want to do in this project is understand whether there is a risk and how big a risk that is. We don't want to go into all of a sudden starting to build a warning system around volcanic induced tsunamis if we can determine that the risk to the Australian coastline is quite low, for example. If it's not, then we've got an evidence base to make some decisions to move forward. So really this is understanding the risk first so we can make an informed decision before going into other risk reduction measures. So what do we need? And the royal we here is the Australian Tsunami Advisory Group predominantly, and yeah, so it's not just us we on the group here today. So really, we're looking for an understanding from the literature. We draw on the expertise of the group here today, plus whoever else does end up applying, to translate what is out there for the use by people like us who need to then determine the relevant plans so that we can keep our community safe in our respective jurisdictions. What we are then looking at trying to understand is, or to build, is a database of scenarios. Those scenarios we anticipate would be, a discussion around the sources, where are these sources, any information around their history, their likelihood, etc. And then also how big or, how much intensity. Look, you can see I've no idea about volcanoes, right? Just, how big can these things go, right? So they're going to erupt. I don't know. There's probably some terminology about that. We need to understand what does that mean. And we are looking to ensure that any information is going to be shared for the full research community as well as us in the emergency management sector. Once we have those scenarios understood, we are looking to determine or to build some modelling, deep ocean modelling to the 100-metre depth contour. Now, the reason why we're suggesting that is that that's a simpler modelling to do than inundation modelling. And really, by doing so, it will enable us to be able to compare the wave heights and tsunami wave currents with the same data that comes out of our understanding of the earthquake generated tsunami. So then we can make an informed decision on the comparison between how those particular sources contribute to the hazard at that 100-metre depth contour. That then allows us to understand through a stakeholder workshop to determine whether we think there's going to be a potential threat to the Australian coastline, or where along the Australian eastern seaboard coastline and the southwest of WA, where we might then in turn prioritise future inundation modelling. So just to be clear, we're not asking for inundation modelling in this project, but we may look at a potential case study, if there's some scope to do so. But we don't want to go straight to inundation modelling before making an informed, evidence-based approach to determine what the threat is first and foremost. And then we're going to wrap all that up, well, somebody on the team, on the amongst these research group we won't, wrap it all up into a final report, which is going to tell us about literature review, the workshop outcomes, the potential for that illustrative case study, and also what we, gold star to somebody if you can do this, scope out what a probabilistic tsunami hazard assessment might look like or might take for volcanic risks. because the image that you can see there on the bottom right-hand side is the offshore probabilistic tsunami hazard assessment from earthquake sources. And then that has been the key data set that has driven inundation modelling around Australia. So if there is a need, we would look at, in the future, determining how we might go about that. And of course, to point to any future research opportunities. So once you've done all that, easy peasy, and then this is where the utilisation step really would be to occur. And I've put in bold here and underlined it, is that we've got to assess this tsunami threat first and foremost. And if there is a threat, then we can consider what those next steps are. So we don't want to assume that this is the case. It might be, but we want to take that in a phased way.
I'm just going to stop sharing because we've only got Matt for another 2 minutes. So I just wanted to quickly open it up to any questions from folk online with us today that you might have while Matt's with us.
I have 1 or 2 questions.
Please, Rebecca.
Rebecca. Yeah. This type of study is really great timing, because there's also an interest from our Southwest Pacific neighbours in understanding volcanic and tsunami risk. And so I guess one of my questions is, how open is there scope to be partnering up with those international geological surveys in order to not only be able to model risks and scenarios associated with Australian coastlines, but also Southwest Pacific nations?
That's a good question. Well, we might need to take that on notice, I think, Rebecca. Certainly, we'd like to leverage any current work that's happening at the moment. To what extent that would mean partnering up would need to be closely scrutinised, and we would need to take advice on that. But certainly, leveraging current work and working with folk that are already working in this space is definitely encouraged. Yeah. But please, if you're putting in a submission and you're aware of that work and you have existing relationships with those researchers, that's worth noting.
Yeah. I've got one more question. Given that the fundamental research, really does need to be applied so that the products are suitable to be integrated with other sort of decision support systems, is there any advice that you can provide as to the exact nature of the deliverables that you feel would be sort of best designed for maximum impact and usage?
Jane, I might hand this one to you. You've given us some specs that we've included in the EOI. Did you want to go into those at all?
That's a good question, Rebecca. Look, I think in the EOI, Matt Zanini made a comment around, that there are some other open source platforms that do host landslide induced tsunami source information, I understand. I can't remember the name of it. It starts with P. So look, anything that is an open format is really useful. So, well, that's the only way really that we can tangibly use it. So if there is any, I guess there's a distinction between the source information and then modelling information. Modelling information is pretty sort of standard, I guess, in the scientific formats, NetCDF, etc., that kind of thing, which can then be translated into GIS platforms.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca, for those questions. Anything further? And we'll get into some more detail. Alan, go for it. Andrew.
Just a quick comment. I won't talk too much, but I put a comment in the chat. And just to say that I think this work really, the timing is very good with a global conversation at the moment around multi-hazard early warning systems and what has been a tendency to just focus on the hydromet. And whatever comes out of this work, I'd really strongly encourage that be fed into conversations with DFAT and other bits of the Australian government around the way that Australia works with its neighbours to ensure that earthquake and volcanic monitoring is well catered for, so that we have a really solid source of situational awareness coming in, because unlike earthquakes, you can actually predict a reasonable amount of what's going to happen in a volcano. You can really ramp up the drills and the event planning and so on for a volcano that might be causing a concern. But otherwise, yeah, good luck with everything. It looks like a wonderful project. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Alan. We might jump into the presentation because that deals with some of the questions that we're getting in the chat as well. So just to talk, Jane mentioned some of the core outputs that we'll be looking for, but there's some additional material that's required from an NHRA perspective. So not only the literature review, the database, the stakeholder workshop and the final report, we'll also need the successful research team to develop a co-designed project plan with the end users, and that project plan forms a schedule to the contract. Yep. We'll also be seeking stakeholder presentations beyond the stakeholder workshop, and also academic peer-reviewed publications in high-ranking international journals. And I think Alan's just given an extra what would you call it, output or outcome that would be beneficial for this piece of work as well. The additional outputs that are required are quarterly progress reports that are done within our turnkey system, the final project report, which Jane has already spoken to, but we also have a project evaluation report that's completed by the research team or the lead researcher, the lead end user, and the NHRA rep. And any other relevant communications outputs, including but not limited to presentations and a hazard note. We also welcome any other innovative outputs that your team could deliver that will help address the outcome. And the outcome, the anticipated outcome we've got here is basically filling in a blind spot that we've got in our tsunami knowledge. We're looking at this project focusing on the risk to the eastern seaboard, but as well as the southwestern coastline, as Matt mentioned, from relevant volcanoes in the Southern Ocean. And the result, of course, we'll have a more robust understanding and a more effective tsunami warning system for Australia. We've got a new section in our EOI submission form, and that is around collaboration. So researchers, given the translation and research and utilisation focus for all of our work at NHRA, it's crucial that research teams use a collaborative approach and engage supporting stakeholder agencies in the research to ensure all of the outputs are useful, usable, and can be used. So therefore, we will need you to outline how you will do this within your submission. So pay particular attention to weaving in a collaborative approach as you pull together your submission. And a little bit on the governance and reporting, so we can give you a look at what the project will require once a successful research team has been engaged. We will have one lead entity that will be the provider for contracting purposes. However, for consortium bids, that lead could then subcontract, to other universities or to engage other researchers in the project. The contract with the lead provider, of course, is with Natural Hazards Research Australia. And we establish our project level governance called the Project Management Committee that includes the lead researcher, a centre representative, and then a lead end user as well. So those folk on the Project Management Committee make decisions about the final project plan. They sign off on project deliverables. They help troubleshoot, milestone delivery. They support the research team with contacts into the sector as well, and we hold regular meetings, they're quarterly meetings. The reporting requirements include the project plan, milestone delivery and quarterly progress reports, and those are linked to payment points within the contract, and as well the project evaluation report that we've noted previously, as well as stakeholder presentations. Some more detail on the EOI process. the EOI itself and its associated information, including all of the frequently asked questions, are all available on the website. And I might actually ask Lara if she wouldn't mind putting some links in the chat for you to the key collateral that's associated with this project. Because this is a procurement process, we need to ensure that any inquiries or further questions beyond this briefing are sent to our generic email address, research@naturalhazards.com.au, because any further questions that we get, we will need to transcribe and put them up on the webpage so that everyone has access to not only the question, but also the response. So you've all got the same information as you're developing your submissions. In terms of preparing a submission, we need you to use our EOI submission form and our budget template. So they're the two documents that you need, two templates you need to use in putting your submission together. And EOIs are basically due to that generic email address by 5 p.m. daylight savings time, as I say it, on Thursday, the 18th of December. This is the first process in a two-part process, or two-part research proposal process. So this basically sets up the ability to assess the different expressions of interest for this project. Once that section is, or that process is finished, the team that's awarded the project will then co-design that project plan with end users. And that's where you get into the real detail around the project. So just remember that this is the first phase. So what you're doing is you're describing how you would go about doing the project, covering off on all of those elements within the EOI document. It's your initial thinking about what this project should look like. And once the successful team gets the go-ahead, then there's an opportunity to adjust the approach with input from our key stakeholders, if you're the preferred supplier. So Lara's hopefully given you a link to the web page, a link to the actual expression of interest for this project, a link to the EOI submission template, a link to the budget template, as well as a link to our research services contract. There's a section in the EOI submission form that asks you to go through our research services contract with your research services office, and to indicate if there will be any changes required or sought to that research services contract. And we need that to be included in the EOI submission. So making a submission, it's significant work putting a submission in, and we really acknowledge that. But there's lots of room within the submission form for you to construct your ideas and how you would want to go about this project. So first of all, we want a statement of capability, including the proposed contributions of each research team member to the project. A statement of 400 words about the diversity of the project team, about the inclusion and respect of First Nations peoples, philosophies, cultures, rights, and/or knowledges, describing how the project team intends to approach the project, including an indicative methodology, a schedule of work, and interim milestones or project outputs, as described in the EOI. A proposed project budget that includes details of any in-kind contribution from research organisations. Please use the budget template. So there's two spots for budget. There's like a broad budget area within the submission form itself, but the detailed project budget is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. And that's where you can talk about the in-kind contributions, not only in terms of researcher FTE, but equipment that you might have access to through the university, any other bits and pieces. The more detail that you put in that budget template, the easier the assessment process will be. We need you to do a clear statement about the outcomes. Now, all of these sections are included within the submission form, so you really don't have to note them down now, but I'm just giving you a bit of a feel for what's involved in pulling a submission together. So a statement about the outcomes, a statement describing the outputs, i.e. the products from the project, the outcomes are the impact of those products, a statement demonstrating the project team's relevant previous stakeholder engagement. So how you've worked with the sector in the past, what sectors you have worked with, what was achieved through that collaborative approach, that sort of information. We also like a risk management statement. So thinking about, you know, what might happen and what mitigations might be required to manage those risks. And again, any requested changes to our proposed form of contract. And we ask you to attach to the submission itself 2-page CVs, if you like, for each proposed project team member. And you can include, you know, publication history and grant project history, but also give consideration to stakeholder engagement, industry engagement within those CVs as well, would be my suggestion. And within the EOI, we've included the evaluation criteria. So this will give you an idea of what parts or what criteria, will be used to assess the EOI submissions. And you will find this detail within the EOI itself as well. So we are looking for research capability. We're looking at your proposed approach to the project. Including your work breakdown schedule. We're looking for project outcomes and outputs and how that marries back to the intent of the project and what we want to get out of the project. We will again be looking at industry engagement. So we're looking for a track record of industry engagement with the ability to support and influence Australia disaster management at a national and/or state or territory level. And we'll also be looking at value for money. So bear in mind that this is a competitive process. So keep that in mind as you're constructing your budgets for this project. Here are some key dates for you. So this gives you a bit of a time frame. So we opened last week, 13th of November. We published the EOI. That was a rejoicing occasion. It was a big process to get the EOI to the point of publication. So thank you to our 3 end users that are on screen with us today for everything that you put in towards that. And we are here. We're on the 18th of November. We're doing the online briefing now. The submissions close on the 18th of December, 5 p.m. daylight savings time. Basically, the dates beyond that are indicative. Once the EOIs close, then we go into the assessment process. If we get a number of high quality submissions that are very close, we might need to implement additional processes that might extend these timeframes. But I've been pretty generous with the timeframes allocated on this slide. So we're hoping that the successful team would be notified well and truly before the end of January, as one of our end users has decided to take February as leave. So we need to get a project plan up as soon as possible, and we need end users to be involved in that. So we're going to try and streamline it so that we have that in play before that end user goes on leave. So the budget envelope for this project is 400 to 500,000 GST. And the time frame is 2 years. And the cautionary words that we say here is the research team should note this is a competitive process. So expressions of interest submissions will be assessed on value for money and the justification for any funds requested. So I just wanted to make that note and stress the importance of putting as much detail, budget detail as possible into that budget template. And there's some more detail on the frequently asked questions about what can be funded through the project budgets and what can't be funded. I'll open it up for any more questions and have a look at what you've got in the chat to see if, thank you for putting all the links up. Lara, appreciate that. And I'll open it up for any other questions that anyone might have, either from the research side or even from our end users, if you wanted to jump in and have a bit more discussion.
Nicola, you mentioned earlier in the presentation something about the seafloor telecommunications cables. Would you be able to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, that wasn't me, that was Jane. So
Oh,
I'm
that
going
was
to hand,
Jane.
that's fine. I'll hand
Thank
over
you.
to Jane. Jane, are you able to talk a bit more about that?
Only in the sense, Rebecca, that I think I can dig out a few articles. They're just just sort of generic articles that refer to the disruption of those cables during submarine landslides. There's been some precedents of that, and potential for any other debris flow. And there's maps online, pretty easily readily available, rather, that show where all the submarine cables are that run into Australia, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. So, I guess that is a consequence as well, not just for the emergency management response element, but also what the other broader economic and other issues might be that we need to be aware of.
Okay, great.
I don't think we're looking for, specifics on that, just to note that, this is something, and if there is something that we need to be aware of, then we can maybe, start some briefing in with those relevant stakeholders who own those things.
And what we'll do, Lara, is we'll include this in the FAQs as well, because what this is looking at is an additional outcome from the project. So we'll list that on the FAQs on the page, the web page.
I want to ask, what is the role of GA and BOM in this project? Are they stakeholders or are they end users or what?
Yeah, both GA and the Bureau are members of the Australian Tsunami Advisory Group, and that's who has put together the EOI. The three end users that are on the screen with us today are the three champions for the project who put it forward. But I might hand over to Jane or Chris to talk more about that.
Given that GA and the Bureau jointly operate the Joint Australian Tsunami Warning Centre, they're key end users out of this project, especially in terms of that risk profile component and also the modelling out to the 100 metres depth. I can't speak directly for those agencies, but coming back to Rebecca's question about utilisation and format of products, we'd be looking for outputs to be able to be either directly or enable their reasonably ready translation or inform additional work to translate as inputs into their predictive modelling and warning system that they use in the GATCWG. So when we do get events occurring, it does improve our ability to forecast and predict these events.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, and I'd just also say, Annie, that we would anticipate, like Chris said, that they're members of ATAG. So, we would consult with them. I mean, whether they're participating, the research would be done by the research team. The research team will have access to the end users, and we can facilitate that access through to GA and the Bureau, but they're not formally tasked or funded necessarily to participate in the project, but they can offer advice. And we would imagine that they would be involved in that stakeholder workshop that we've scheduled in, or would want to schedule into the project as well.
Would they be in the co-design phase that we engage with them? So that 1 month in January to February in the co-design, so it would be the research team discuss with the end user, the three of you, but not the stakeholder at that stage?
I think because of the nature of where the projects come from, Annie, the three end users that have been with us today will be the three entities or agencies that will play the major role, in the development of that project plan. Now, that project plan might not include specifications for outputs. That might require further consultation that will be included in the project plan regarding what those specifications are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. We've got another tricky question from Jodie Fox. Has the Australian Antarctic Division been involved as a stakeholder? At this stage, no, Jodie, they haven't. Would we consider them an end user? I'm not sure how they're involved with ATAG, and ATAG's the primary group. Chris, Jane, can you speak to that?
I can speak to that. So the Antarctic Division are a member of ATAG. So Chris Gallagher, based down here in the Kingston office, is the AAD rep on that group. And obviously, as well as looking at the risk to the mainland that Jane and Matt spoke to, we obviously have a a research and operational presence on Macquarie Island, which is probably part of Tasmania, which is has got a high exposure to tsunami risk, and as they'd be involved in that user requirements component stakeholder engagement bit that Nicola just mentioned. So whilst Matt, Jane and myself would be the primary points for shaping up that project plan, we'd be definitely either through ATAG or through other stakeholder engagement mechanisms that are identified in the project plan. We'd make sure that they're involved in that as a user and recipient of understanding the risk profile and future products derived from that.
Just one more question from me. I can see in the template budget that the right-hand set of columns is the research provider contribution.
Yeah.
So currently that's just for salaries in kind, but if there was a financial contribution as well, how should that be incorporated into the budget?
Yep. So that would be incorporated. So there's two parts to that. The top part is personnel.
Okay,
and when you
gotcha.
go
Yep.
down under that,
Oh, yeah.
yep, there's a second section for that budget template. And there's also a section within the submission form, the EOI submission form itself, where you can put broad values in. Yep. So what would be contributed co-contributions from other entities in that section as well. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. That's great. Everybody's in there looking. This is a good sign. It's a good sign that we're going to get some good quality submissions. And we thank you all for your interest and work on that. That's very exciting.
I've just got one quick question. I apologise for the darkness of my camera, but yeah, I just was wondering if there is a conflict of interest for people who are members of ATAG or whose agencies are members of ATAG. We can, figure that out later if you like. I just ask as someone who is a member of ATAG but is also quite interested.
Let's have a quick squeeze at the website. But if you have a look at the FAQs, Claire, and start scrolling through, there's a key question there about who can actually put in a submission. And agencies can put in as long as they haven't been involved in the development of the concept. I would, if I were you, from here, because that is a very tricky question.
Yeah. And
I would suggest, seriously, I would suggest that you submit that query in writing via an email to research at Natural Hazards. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Just providing the further context,
yep,
and the details, and then we can get some legal advice on that. Any other questions that you want to squeeze in, because this is your last opportunity, really, to ask a question while the EOI is open. And I hope some of you have had an opportunity to introduce yourselves via the chat if you are interested in working with other researchers on a submission. It's great to see so much interest for this project. And
Hi, Paul Taylor here.
Hello, Paul.
It's not a question, it's more a something that needs to be considered.
Mm-hmm.
Information about the potential source areas of tsunamis that might affect the coast. All right, Rebecca and Scott and Martin and myself have been over the years have been doing a lot of work over in the Southwest Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
And even up until just recently, there has been very little known about the potential for tsunami generation, particularly from a lot of the areas. I guess the Tonga event in 2022, it sort of put the Southwest Pacific on the world screen. And it highlighted the potential for a large-scale volcanic eruption and the effect that it could have, not just on Australia, but the entire region. So I think one of the important aspects of a project like this is to fully understand the potential and the risk involved in the individual countries that are likely to be sources for tsunamis that might be generated by either large-scale volcanic eruptions or collapses of both subaerial or submarine volcanic edifices. I think Rebecca will probably agree with that. But I just thought I'd make that statement to start with.
Yeah.
Because it's an important first step to understand what your regions are. And I'm also pleased that someone has mentioned the possibility of Herden McDonald Island. There's been very little done on those areas as far as geological research is concerned. And if you just look at for Heard Island, if you look at the morphology of the island itself, you can see that there is the probable forms produced by large scale edifice collapses. So it could be quite a significant source, particularly for Western Australia.
That's great. Thank you, Avi. I'm glad you agree with the need for this work. That's it's one part of a bigger puzzle, but we've got the scope that we've got to work with at the moment for this piece of work itself. I'm not sure how much broader we can go. Jane or Chris, if you'd like to comment on that at this point.
Probably comes back to that earlier comment from Rebecca, where she informed us of the interest in the work from the Southwest Pacific partner nations and that broader work. So I guess we've got to provide that advice on notice about how broad we can make the scope within the remit of NHRA, but and then the additional guidance about the opportunity for linkages and partnerships. And I guess that's always a benefit too, even if the scope of this project somewhat constrained to the geographical bounds of, looking at the risk to Australia. The informing component of this project about identifying those sources of hazard, they can certainly be utilised to leverage off other work, and we could maybe look at using this work as the workflow and the process developed for this project could create a good foundational basis for additional work with our Southwest Pacific partners. So the interested research organisations there may be an opportunity for them to run two parallel. If we can't nest that work within this project, they may be able to run two aligned parallel projects, one focusing on our need for Australia, but then using the same workflow processes and systems to deliver similar products for our neighbours in the Southwest Pacific. That might be something they want to consider.
We definitely will be focusing this one on the Australian context.
Yeah, a lot of the apparent data gaps that we have for early warning systems, some of those repositories are actually hosted within the Southwest Pacific geological surveys, like Tonga Geological Services. And so in order to understand the risk better, we need to work with them to access some of their site-specific knowledge and history of working with those volcanic centres. So partnerships, I think, are important. Good
on you, Rebecca. Thank you. Folks, I'm going to call time. We've hit 11 o'clock. Thank you all for your contributions, and especially you too, Rebecca. That's been a great contribution that you've offered in your sharings and your questions and queries today. I'd really like to especially thank Chris, Jane and Matt for their input into the project, and I'd also really like to thank Lara for all her support for today's webinar, online briefing. We will put this up as soon as we can online, and we will transcribe some of the questions and put some further information based on our conversations today. And we wish you all the very best and look forward to seeing your submissions. Thank you, everyone.